Hello, all of our lovely listeners. I am super excited today to welcome my friend, Libbee. And I'm really going to let Libbee do her own introduction. I want to hear all the cool things that you do. But I do want to say that the first time I was introduced to Libbee was in a sound bath environment. And for those of you who don't know what that is, we'll get into it. But it is an amazing, very high vibing experience. And I loved it so much that I brought my husband back the second time when I came in to see her specifically. And there's a lot of different people out there who do sound baths, but I think one of the unique things about your gift, Libbee, is that you're so intuitive. And so as you're reading the room and really adjusting the music that you're playing, the vibrations that you're sending out and that people are sending to you, you actually tell us all about it at the end. And so to really have an experience and then learn about what was going on an energetic level was fucking really cool. Yeah. So thank you.
Yeah. Wow. Oh, thank you for sharing that. Thank you both for having me today. Really excited to be here. Yes, I do sound therapy. I'm on I think my 9th year now of doing group sound therapy. It's been an interesting journey. I think a lot of people's experience that they share with me with how the sound baths are for them is that they feel a little bit more intimate or a little bit more deep, are usually the words people say. And I think it has a lot to do with how I play the bowls. So I'm completely self-taught. I didn't go through a training program. I really just heard some sound bowls on YouTube at one point in my life when I was really sick and discovered that this was a particular modality I was really attracted to. And it was really the experiential data from working with the bowls, even just in a recording, was really profound for me. So I knew that if I got my opportunity to have my own set, it would be next level. So I, on a whim, just purchased my own set and I started playing, and I learned that there was a certain way that I played that allowed me to go into sort of a trance state, in my own meditation while I was playing the bowls for myself. And then shortly after I started experimenting with that, I realized that there was a need for this in the world and that people really wanted to experience it. So people would just show up and be like, hey, I heard you have bowls. Can you play them for me? What's this like? And it was this curiosity and the playfulness that brought people to me. And suddenly I just found myself in a circumstance where I was playing routinely for people. So it wasn't something that I thought I would be doing, but when I started doing it, I realized that it felt very natural and it felt very important. So I think the trance state is something I kept. And so the way that I play the bowls, I don't ding the side of the bowls. A lot of people, when you watch how other people play, we all play very differently. And it's not like one is better than the other. But my intention is to try to keep people in as much of a relaxed state as possible, because I think the body receives differently there. And I just noticed for a lot of us, we have dysregulated nervous systems. So even just a banging of a certain sound can cause a fight or flight reaction. So even though the sound is beautiful, it has sort of an unconscious reaction in the body that I think can be prohibitive from people going into that deep trance, because they're getting jarred and then they have to kind of recover.
It's like an alarm. I think when we hear noises like that, it's oh, wake up, be alert, something's happening,
Totally.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I found that for me, even though I was very familiar with the sounds, that even hearing the banging now, 9 years later, I still kind of get into an alert state. And that has its own intention and purpose. I think that can be helpful in certain settings, or perhaps trying to guide yourself through working through that fear consciously. Majority of my sound bath offerings, I'm looking to do sort of the opposite experience, which is just drop in, explore what you're feeling in your body, notice what each vibration is bringing into your system. And through that, I want people to sort of be halfway in that dream state and halfway conscious, rather than super alert and active and trying to navigate a fight or flight reaction. So
you're describing hypnosis, which is my world. But yeah, that's really that space in between the awake and the sleep. And it is when we can receive so much more in our subconscious mind. So when we're even talking about doing it on a very therapeutic level, even outside of just like relaxation, that is where like that deep work really happens.
Totally.
Super cool.
Yeah. And it's really amazing how the brain works, because it only takes about 15 minutes of playing the bowls in that way to create a binaural frequency. So that's a fancy word for saying that there's a left and a right brain hemisphere balance that happens. And the way that the sound actually travels through the body is in like a figure 8 pattern. And when your body experiences that, it creates a balance. And so if you have something going on in your body that makes you kind of lean into one side of your brain more than the other, that can be a big change for someone to experience. And we know that having that binaural frequency for just even that short period of time can bring in a brainwave state called theta. And theta is usually what we get into when we're in a really deep REM sleep. But some people don't even really get there anymore if they're not fully getting into that deep sleep because of fight or flight reaction or trauma and stress.
And sleeping medications.
Right, right. Yeah, so we're craving theta all the time.
It is. It's so phenomenal. I'm a very light sleeper. And it's really cool because I got one of those Aura rings, and I hate tracking things. I am not a good tracker. I don't like to be in systems, and it's just me, right? Like even with the Peloton, like I have one, but I'm not hooking up with anyone. I don't care what anyone's stats are.
You want to be free.
I just want to be free. And how do I feel in this moment? But the cool thing with the Aura ring, as you're talking about this deep sleep and getting into all those different places, you can start to really track where you are with that. And I haven't brought it into, I'm really curious now. I haven't brought it into a sound bath experience, but what I know about where I'm able to go individually in one of those experiences versus just like a night of sleeping, I am in a completely different place. I mean, it is really transformative. When I wake up in the mornings, I still sometimes will feel groggy. When I go to a sound bath, I don't know how long you're playing, 30 minutes. Sometimes it feels like it's hours. And I wake up and there's this restfulness that is like no other.
Yeah.
It is really phenomenal. So if anyone out there has not experienced this, I encourage you. You can check it out on YouTube. You can find your local people. We'll put Libby's information in also in our show notes. But it is really phenomenal. It's super cool. So the work you're doing is so great. And I can't wait for you to also tell everybody like deeper how you really got into it and the healing that you experienced from it.
Yeah, I love that you brought up sleep because that is typically how people find sound therapy is through insomnia or through sleep disorders of any kind, or just the need to like have something to guide them into sleep. And that's sort of how I found it, actually. It was during a time in my life where I had an autoimmune disorder called lupus, and I was really struggling with body pain. And so the pain was so significant that I was having a hard time relaxing and resting. And I was just holding so much tension in my body that drifting off to sleep was really difficult. And I would just take things that would kind of slam me out of my body just to get that relaxation, but it wasn't feeling, like you mentioned earlier, like all that restful. I'd wake up and feel really groggy and kind of disconnected from my body. So it kind of perpetuated this cycle of a disconnection rather than like a harmonious state of healing.
Can you explain a little bit about lupus for our listeners that don't really understand it? And also, how old were you when you got that diagnosis?
I was about 21, I believe, 22, 21,
so
22.
young.
Yeah, I was pretty young. And I think I actually exhibited a lot of signs that were early, like kind of onset, a lot of physical body pain. I had pancreatitis, things that were strange because my diet was not great, but it wasn't terrible. And so it didn't really add up like why I was having so much stomach pain and things like that. I had kind of arthritis symptoms that progressed significantly because when you're in what they call a flare-up, that's like an inflammatory state where the body's like attacking itself. So any autoimmune disorder, your body is kind of working against your own immune system and creating problems that are more symptomatic of that underlying issue of having just extreme inflammation. For me, it turned out that was predominantly caused from stress. I think that's true for a lot of people. And I think we have a hard time like identifying whether it's appropriate to be stressed or not. Like, oh, well, my life is pretty solid. Right. I'm not stressed, but you may actually be exhibiting stress.
Yeah. Everyone has different thresholds for stress. And we live in a society that just demands so much from us.
We do. And I think we are so programmed to think that this is normal.
Mm-hmm.
And so for me, I didn't identify as somebody who was stressed, but hindsight, like very stressed. And it started really young. I'm the oldest of 3 kids, and my brother, who's only 3 years younger than me, so the middle child, he's severely disabled. And when he was born, we weren't even sure if he was going to make it. It was a very high stress environment. He would stop breathing in the middle of the night. He has epilepsy really bad. He was having 8 to 10 grand mal seizures a day.
Oh.
It was very stressful as a child growing up in an environment where you're trying to navigate that lifestyle.
And as an oldest, I understand that like feeling of needing to protect the family and the younger siblings.
Yeah. Yeah. So my coping was really entertainment. So I was the entertainer. I was a dancer, a singer. I did theater. I was very like, okay, everyone's stressed out. Like, look over here and laugh for a minute.
Yeah.
And so I would bring in that element, which really worked, I think, for a lot of that journey. But what I didn't understand was that over time, that kind of consistency to the fight or flight was causing a toll on my physical body. And so I was carrying all of this stress like in the center of my, abdomen. And so the lupus thing was sort of a wake up call for me in terms of how much of this can be resolved with Western medicine. It's kind of unfortunate. A lot of autoimmune people, when you get that diagnosis, you're kind of chasing a diagnosis. And then when you get it, you find out the hard way that there's not really a lot of solutions. So you're like, what did I just go through all that for? Because while I felt relief in having an understanding, it also didn't give me a path of what to do about it. It was like, okay, well, you have this thing, it may kill you. And you're like, great, that's not the attitude and belief that I want to have. But that is kind of what is given to you in the Western way of seeing diagnosis.
And we're seeing more and more
Yeah.
of these autoimmune being diagnosed every day.
Absolutely.
It's like massive. So something's going on with the culture.
Yeah. And so for me, trying to eliminate stress was one of my top priorities. Learning how to do that, it is an interesting journey. And spending time with myself was also really foreign and weird. It was like, okay, I have to like eliminate everything and then slowly bring things back into my life. And I was really fortunate to be able to stop working for a period of time and just really focus on my health every day. And because I did that, which was one part dietary change, I did yoga and breathing, which was huge change for me, like learning how to be in my body and how to regulate my breath. And then the sound therapy. And those were kind of the main players for me in consistent routine. And 3 months after I got a pretty significant, like bad blood work, they came back and they were like, okay, if you don't make changes, like you'll be lucky if you were 35, like it's bad. And so I took it seriously and I was like, okay, let me just see what I can do by just changing my lifestyle. And 3 months later, I got a follow-up lab. At that point, I was feeling better. I physically looked different. Like my eyes changed color. The glow in my face was kind of back. I went from not being able to hold a fork to being able to like go up and down the stairs and like lift things again. So it was a pretty big leap in a relatively short period of time. And that lab work came back and it didn't show a single sign that I had lupus.
Wow.
And my doctor was like, whatever you're doing is working. I can't explain it. I don't really understand it, but obviously you're really impacted by your lifestyle.
So breath work, sound bowls, yoga, and then diet changes. What kind of changes did you implement to your diet?
I started juicing. Started juicing every day and really just cut out everything that was not natural. Wanted to have as clean, live living enzymes, like real food in my body. So I wasn't eating the snacky things like chips. I was going, okay, if I want a snack, I'm going to have, carrots and this like dip I made because I know exactly what's in it because I made it. And so I got really into like cooking and having fun kind of playing with these different elements of, okay, how can I work this thing into my diet that I know is really good for me? Maybe I don't love it, but how can I hide it in something and make sure I'm getting enough of it? And so I started getting more excited about eating rather than going into I can't have all these things.
Right. Sometimes I have met people who have that mindset of, well, I can't have this and I can't have that. And they're constantly asking everybody, what's in this, what's in that. And I just think to myself, like, that just sounds awful and really hard way to go through life. So that's amazing. You were able to turn that around.
Yeah, because I realized it felt very stressful to think about being restrictive in any way. I knew that there was a temporary agreement I was making with myself to just say, let's just try this on and see if it fits, and let's just see what happens. It doesn't need to be a forever thing.
We'll experiment.
Yeah. And I think that's really important attitude to have, because otherwise you're sort of feeling like your body's working against you. And I think that belief was really harmful, because that is how I felt, especially being super young and them saying, you have pancreatitis. And
that's
usually
daunting.
not something you hear a young person having.
No.
So I felt like, my body's betraying me. And that kind of brought me into a low level, almost depressive anxiety state. Because I wasn't sure, how to resolve it without just being on medications, and the medications really weren't working. So it wasn't leaving me with a lot of options. So I had nothing to lose, really.
Yeah.
And I think that's why I gravitated towards YouTube and just, what are other people doing? And I could just feel into people sharing certain things, and I would get that feedback in my body, like, oh, I think I should try that. I don't really understand it, but like, let's just see what happens.
Why not?
Yeah. So much of my journey has been that this feels right. There's a gut feeling, and it may not make sense to my mind yet, but but my mind will catch up, and I think that's true for even the sound therapy.
Absolutely.
And the experience of the sound bath. You may not understand how it's working or why something is happening for you, but just being in the experience of it and being willing to feel it is a huge part of how the body heals.
I was even thinking how cool and how intuitive of you to have had that little curiosity about the sound bowls from just watching a couple videos on YouTube to then allowing yourself. And I think this is true for a lot of our guests. So I hope this is something that our listeners can kind of take with them and maybe implement in their own life, is that curiosity, and then to take action to then go to the next step. And maybe, that's the universe sort of guiding you in the direction you're supposed to go. I mean, now you do this for a living and you help others.
The whole time you're talking, I'm just like thinking, wow, you're a walking example of somebody who does have that curiosity, but also is trying it. Because I think we hear a lot, we talk to people, I heard you can do this. I heard you can do this, but they kind of file that back. And so to actually say, no, I am going to do this, even if it's experimental, even if it's just like, let me try this on. And then you're here to say, like, I change numbers, because that's what the medical community looks at, right? It's all about what are those numbers? Yeah, data. You're also coming from it. I heard you say, like, I looked different. I felt different. You saw the results happen within you. And so that, I think, is so important. And I also think that's why you're such an amazing, like, intuitive person, like having gone through this experience to have to get that deep, and now bringing that to your people that I'm going to say that you're healing. Like it truly is that power. But I love that intuition. You've tapped into it in so many different ways. As a little girl, I've got to be the jokester. I got to be the funny one, and then through this whole journey with healing yourself.
Thank you. Yeah. I think that my denial of my intuition, in my teenage years was a huge part of why the lupus thing even came up for me. Like looking back, I can see, it was weird. It wasn't something people were like celebrating. Actually, I'm quite fortunate that both of my parents were very accepting of my intuitive gifts. And even at the point where I started saying, okay, I want training. I actually want to go develop this more. Like everyone celebrated that. So that's a very rare journey. I hear from people that often that's not the case. And so I felt very supported, and I'm super grateful for that. But it's also kind of amusing to me because I still got in my own way. Like there was still a level of, this isn't what the other kids are into. I have a lot of like funny little ghost stories that would happen when I was like 12. Like,
I love those.
Yeah, but it was to the point where it was making me weird.
Yeah.
And I was like,
we don't want to be weird.
Right.
Right.
And I was like, well, I'll be weird to a certain extent, but that's like really weird. And you can't explain it.
Yeah.
You don't know why it's happening, So it took a while for me to understand that part of that was just to kind of get my attention and to keep me sort of like, hey, this is valid. This is real. This is part of your path. I do think everyone is intuitive in their own way. I think for me, I just had that turned on much higher, probably because of my childhood and what was going on with my brother and trying to help kind of lead my family in the right direction with that. It's interesting. At one point, shortly after my lupus journey, I started exploring different anti-inflammatories, and I stumbled on CBD. And this was during an era where most people didn't even know what that meant. Like, that was like speaking a foreign language. They had absolutely no idea what CBD was. And like I said, my brother was very sick. He was having 8 to 12 grand mal seizures a day. He was on over 15 pharmaceutical medications just for the seizures, in addition to all these other things. And none of it was working. And it was looking real like, okay, he is spiraling down, and then we're running out of options. And because my family at this point trusted my intuition and we all were collaborating on this, we decided, again, it was like, we have nothing to lose and everything to gain. Let's just see what happens. And so we put him on CBD, and we immediately noticed that he only had like 1 seizure that week.
Oh my God.
And we were like, okay, we're on to something.
Wow.
Like, there's something with his body that this is really working. And so it's both this honoring of the plant medicine itself, but also our collective intuition that this was the right choice, which was a scary choice to make because we weren't super familiar with it. And there's all these programmings around,
Oh yeah.
It's cannabis and oh, your kid's going to be super high,
Right.
but CBD actually doesn't have psychoactive effects.
Right.
So he's not super high, and it's an incredible anti-inflammatory. So that opened up a whole plant world for me. And so I kind of live this life, like to your point of what you said earlier, where I've learned to trust that sometimes it feels like you're taking a huge leap of faith and it's kind of wackadoodle and you don't have all the answers, but it's just this thing like in your heart that's like, this is the right thing.
That inner
Don't
knowing.
miss this opportunity, So now my brother is healthier than he's ever been. He has
Amazing.
maybe like 4 to 5 seizures a year,
Wow.
which is pretty incredible from where we were. And usually it's tied in with a full moon. So when he does have a seizure, there's a lot of people in the seizure community that have recognized the patterns. They chart their seizures and they realize as there's this influx of energy from the full moon in relationship to the like water and the electricity in our body, it causes a lot of people to have.
What are we, like 98% water or something crazy like that? We're almost all water.
Yeah.
So that makes sense.
So the reactivity is quite high. So I'm very involved with that community, which has tied into what I do for a living because I just sort of found myself resonating with people who have different chronic illnesses or they have kind of weird medical things going on. And because I've trained myself to tune into that, a lot of my work and focus now is helping people like look at their body and kind of figure out what's out of alignment or what solutions could be there. Like, hey, let's be in collaboration. So I don't really necessarily witness myself in I am a healer and these people are not. I'm just like almost an intuitive coach saying, hey, this is what I'm seeing. This is what my library of information is giving me. And if that resonates for you, great. If it doesn't, awesome.
Yeah.
Like it's all neutral. And I just get the beauty of the reward that oftentimes people come back to me and say, wow, that was like spot on. And that thing you recommended and you mentioned really worked for me. And now my numbers have increased and I'm not sick anymore, whatever it is. And so, it's interesting that everything that I've just experimented for myself and my family has turned out to be something that I now do for a living.
Yeah. You're such an example to the people that you're helping also that they can be intuitive. They can get in touch with their bodies and tap into that inner knowing.
Absolutely. And that's half of what I hope to encourage people to play around with. You know, it's just about developing trust through practice. And it's hard to trust yourself. It's easier to be like, tell me all the answers, you know, and that's just not how the world works. And so practicing like self-discernment and being like, you know, what does a yes feel like in your body? Like, what do you notice? What does a no feel like in your body? And use that as like a frame of reference.
So simple, right? But like we don't even give ourselves time to even process that.
I think we shut it off pretty early on as soon as we realize, like you said, we don't want to be different.
Yeah.
And it's like we just go straight to the mind and kind of shut off that body feeling, knowing. And we lose so much there. I've been playing around a little bit with like if I get that thought of like, I should call someone, I just do it now.
Yeah.
Or little things like that, you know, just those little nudges that everyone gets all throughout the day. And so often we're like, oh, I don't have time for that. I'm doing this right now. And it's like, wow, I text someone in my family recently and my aunt, and she said, that was so wonderful. And I needed to hear that right now. And this has just been like a Christmas gift hearing from you. And I thought, oh my gosh, so many times before I would have just said like, oh, it'd be weird if I text her right now.
Pass. Yeah. And talk yourself out of it.
Right.
Yeah. Well, and there's just so much programming in our world about how to avoid feeling. Like everything is kind of set up to take us out of our feeling centers and into the mind. And so the mind becomes very drained and overwhelmed. And because we're not really sitting in our feelings as much, then that means that they're not collaborating very well.
That disconnect.
Yeah.
No wonder we get anxiety.
Yeah.
And get stressed out.
Yeah, exactly. So a lot of what I think has become an important tool for me is to recognize when my mental mind is kind of taking over, and that's a good point for me to go, okay, what's a modality I can do or an experience I can bring myself into that doesn't require the mind? And that's why I love sound therapy so much, because really it's just you show up, you drop in, you feel into your body, you're receiving, you don't have to be efforting your way through this experience. And I think we don't have a lot of different healing modalities that really offer that.
Yeah.
Oftentimes we're like oversaturated with information and a lot of knowledge, which is great. Those things are important, but not when it becomes too much. And then you're kind of chasing these answers and you're trying all these different things, and you can't even feel whether any of them are working because you're still very disconnected from your body. And so you could be, in a sense, taking the right supplements, but if you're not feeling into your body, then it's sort of like they just pass through you and you're not really in agreement with that medicine.
Well, and it's that whole vibrational exchange too, the energetic exchange of even like a supplement that you might be ingesting. And it's like, does that formulation really resonate with the cells and the energy that your body is made up of, right? Like the same capsule that you're taking, we may have the same issue, but like that capsule may not be the best one for you, but it is for me.
Yeah.
And we don't know. And so I think we also don't pay attention to those energetic feelings and responses that we're intuiting all the time. I love muscle testing because I think that's always cool, where you get to hold something and have somebody push down on your arm to see like, is there resistance or not? And, it's with that same whole idea, like, is this right for me and my body? But yeah, the bowls, I think they're just incredibly special. And, you actually inspired me to start bringing bowls into the work that I do. So whether I'm working with a hypnotherapy client or now I'm teaching yoga, and I'll just bring one because I don't really even know how to play them, but just there is something that I feel so connected to. We actually had one of our past guests say to me, she was doing kind of a download. Yes. She was a psychic, and she's like, you will be playing bowls. I'm like, what? Okay. And it's funny because I try to bring in a lot of musical instruments in general into my home. Like I've tried to have kids play piano, guitar, drums, like all these really fun, we've got shakers, like all the things. And, but there's something about those crystal bowls. And when I walk into even like a crystal shop that has them, I'm just pulled constantly. So I have to share tonight, I'm super excited. It's just interesting that this landed on the same day, but somebody invited me to come do, not perform one, but, or facilitate one, but receive a sound bowl experience, sound bath experience while I'm floating in a pool.
Oh,
like,
lovely.
yeah, on top of a platform. So I know a lot of people are starting to get into this whole, thing. So I don't know, let you guys know how it goes after, because
so
I've never
amazing.
done that before. But I love that a lot more wellness centers also are bringing it in. I just went to a retreat in Arizona, and that every night they had a sound bath that people can turn down to. And I just think more and more people now are really understanding the power that these bowls have. But again, I think to find a practitioner, any of us can play them, any of us can have fun with them. But it's funny, Libbee, like I really didn't know all your story that you've been sharing with us today. I knew some things. You also send out a newsletter that really talks about different things that are going on with the moon, and what you might also be intuiting around all of that. So I had no idea that where that all came from, and how you even got connected into all that. I mean, you really do just have so many gifts that are within you. And so each time I see being you, that's her email is, we'll put the whole address on there. But like when I see that come through, I get lit up. And so when you said that, how do you feel like the yes in your body? It's like, for me, it's excitement. And it's like, ooh, and the curiosity that you talked about, Greta, was like, oh yeah, what is this? I get 1,000 emails all day long, right? And half of them I'm like, delete, delete, delete. But I see yours and I'm instantly drawn to, what does Libbee have to say? Like, I need to know.
Oh,
It's so amazing.
Yeah, that's so sweet. I think that when we look at the collective and kind of what's going on, sometimes, especially since quarantine, people feel very alone and isolated, and there aren't a lot of options to be able to talk about experiences or things that are coming up for them. So I try to touch on that in a newsletter to just say, hey, this is kind of collectively what we're experiencing, and it may come up in a different way for you, but just know that you are part of this experience as a group, and this isn't like the world is against me, I'm having a tough week, and I think that's really helpful for people, because I'm fortunate that I get to connect with a lot of people all the time, which means I'm always holding that awareness that we're all having very similar, simultaneous experiences that express themselves a little bit differently, but they're all kind of on the same wavelength, and so to have that perspective is such a gift, because you remember like, oh yes, we're all in this together. Like, it doesn't take away from the uniqueness of who we are, but it adds to this experience of us being like one cohesive unit as a collective. And that somehow that brings forward this piece of knowing like, this is temporary, we'll get through this. And, or there's a collective high and everyone's in a really great space. And it's like, let's really use this opportunity to do something really cool, like manifest some things together during this time. So it goes both directions. And, I think to your point about the sound therapy, it's so exciting to watch it come in such a modern way, because when I first started, a lot of people really didn't know what they were. A lot of people were familiar with the Tibetan bowls, which are the metal bowls.
That's what I started with, a little gold, like coppery one, and it was like, oh, okay, this is fun. It feels very medicine-y, but like ancient medicine-y, and it looks cool on the shelf. But I really didn't have a deep understanding about what exactly it was doing.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah.
We started from that point for sure.
Yeah. And I love that there's just more exposure, because I think through that people are more willing to show up and try it. And so I've seen like an explosion of willingness to show up in the last 2 years, like the numbers that are showing up to these sound events that are new people are amazing. Like usually it's 75% new people for us when we're playing. So that's really exciting, because that means I get an opportunity to be their first experience, which I think is just fun for me, because I love to talk about the science of it. Like I'm not, even though I have all of this spiritual awareness and this kind of intuitive side, I recognize that that's not everyone's cup of tea. And through the years of experience, I've really dialed down some of the language that actually feels prohibitive for people to show up. I want people to heal. I want people to have a facilitator that has a neutrality, that I'm totally myself, but I'm not coming at you with a programmed way of presenting the information that may make you feel like you're not included. Like I want everyone to show up and feel included.
Not put those walls up as soon as they hear maybe something that could kind of sound spiritual and mystical.
Right. Like if I come in and I say, welcome to this 5D consciousness experience. Like
I'd be all,
like,
okay, but some people, yeah, right?
they're
Like, what the hell?
5D,
Yeah.
what? You know?
Yeah.
And so, but
Michelle and I are in.
Yeah, we're in for sure.
All the way.
and I will say just for fun here that I have been really criticized for this because that is something I used to do.
Yeah.
That is how people have identified me. And I got really dialed down into simplistics and basics and kind of reconnected with my own nature. And I went, wait a minute, like this is something that is prohibiting people from showing up that maybe really need this modality. How can I unwind the programming within myself and then know that I don't need to speak to those things necessarily? I can just carry them within my being and that vibrationally connects with people. So it's not like I've dropped this part of myself. I've just changed the way in which I feel like it's absolutely necessary for everyone to know all of those things. That's a mental, digestible programming that actually doesn't really feel all that important to me anymore.
Yeah. I think it's so cool that we live in a time where these things, these spiritual truths that we know are getting backed by science now. So I think we're just in this really cool place in time where it's crossing
It is.
over. And
Yeah. Well, and I think the experience is important. Like what people experience becomes their truth. And so it's not as important to me to hammer people with why it's happening, where it comes from. You know, we touch on expectation a little bit. Like this may be something you experience. And if that happens for you, you know, like if there's a discomfort with a certain sound or a certain vibration that we're playing, just know that that can happen because your body's trying to release something. So taking a deep breath and like feeling into that gives the body permission to really release it. And it should move fairly quickly. So we touch on those pieces of it, but I'm not trying to get in there and be like, let's figure out the exact thing that's connected to. It's such a mental way of approaching it.
Yeah.
And so I've kind of like untrained myself away from that style that I was taught when I went through like intuitive training, that was important. And so it's like I've gotten back into my own sense of like cherry picking things and realizing that I would much rather be all inclusive. And that means that people feel safe to invite their friends and family who maybe have never experienced these types of things before, and that the experience becomes the teacher. You know, I am not taking on that role of trying to tell you what you're experiencing. It's like, you tell me what you're experiencing. Like, I just want to know, like, how cool. And that maybe that experience is similar to someone else in the room.
Yeah.
You know, and so we have these little discussions at the end of like what bowls were really loud or really alive. And, we're intuitively tuning into the room when we're playing. And so my partner Ryan and I play together, which is a really special experience. And I think that kind of in and of itself represents an interesting balance. Like I've noticed that since we've incorporated more consistency of the two of us playing together, like there's more men coming into the experience, which is lovely.
Oh, men need it.
Yeah, they really
They need
do.
it. They're so stressed.
They are stressed and they don't have a lot of safe places to do relaxing, healing without it being marketed as a women's only feminine expression. So as much as I value those things, I just felt that was not my calling. My calling was to really try to be available for all walks of life and even children. So my first group that I ever played for was children. Because the parents came to me and said their kids were having some behavioral issues at school, or they were going through some pretty intense trauma. And a friend of mine who was teaching children at the time, we talked about it and just went, and let's just try to do a children's meditation class. And so we set them up with art. And while we played the bowls, they had the creative freedom to either like lay down on these cozy little pillow piles, or they could sit there and create art. And the parents came to pick up their kids and they were like, I can't believe that this is my child. Like my child never sits down. They're sitting down. They're very calm. Some kids took naps. It was great.
So cool.
And some of them had these beautiful drawings. They're like, oh, I felt it in my heart. And I drew what this felt like.
Wow.
We were like, whoa, this is so cool. Because it's about remembering that this is how I feel we were meant to be connecting with sound. Like we are just living in a world that has not given us the opportunity to remember that sound is a huge part of who we are, and that each of us has our own frequency, and then the different organs and places in our body.
Like what you
have
were
their own
saying about
frequencies.
what works for someone might not work
Different
for someone
vibrations.
else.
I was just thinking as you were talking too about like, and my nose keeps itching, Amal. Is there like a spirit in the room right now? Because I keep like, what's going on? Something's happening. But I was just thinking about this experience too as being a mom, and like the first thing I'm really concerned about with my baby is there a heartbeat? And that's the first sort of vibration and sound that I am connecting with.
Wow.
I know.
Yeah.
Makes me a little
I
emotional.
know.
But I was like literally, and even
I'll remember that feeling.
yeah. And I remember buying monitors just to be like, ooh, how cool would it be to just like hear the little heartbeat
whenever.
all the time. And even with like, little babies or kids, they have animals now that have just kind of that simulated like vibration of a heartbeat, that same kind of pattern and that sort of thing. And so, yeah, like even from the moment we're a being, it's like there is a vibration that is life,
The baby's getting it from the mother. And
Yeah.
the mother is experiencing the baby's vibration.
Such a like deep connection.
It is, yeah. And I think, there's also, there's an interesting thing about the way that sound travels through the body, because we think about our ears is where the sound is always coming in, but the whole body is experiencing it. So even though we may have a lot of attention on what things sound like from our ear channels, it doesn't mean that you're also not absorbing that frequency through your toes or through your knees or through your elbows. And so one of my favorite things to do with sound is to encourage people to feel into places they don't normally pay attention to. And it takes a little bit of experimenting to figure out, like, how do I feel into my ankles? Like, what does that mean?
So this is fun. I have a little, I'm like laughing internally because our last guest we had on was a sex therapist.
Oh, lovely.
And we were talking about orgasm and how orgasm is energy and how, it's not always about the penetration or like the one part of the body people always think about, right? Or like the genitals.
Yeah.
And it's like, she was explaining to us, you can have an orgasm by a touch of the nipple or, little bit of air on the back of your neck. And so what I'm hearing you say is something that's so similar. It's what's resonating with me is that our whole body is feeling. It's not in receiving.
Yeah.
It's not just the ears, which we attach to audible and this, we are taking in these receptors, like you're saying, this receiving is happening all over our whole entire being. And we forget that.
We do.
Because we live up here so much.
We live in the center of our head,
Yes.
So oftentimes when people experience a sound bath for the first time, majority of their attention is placed in the center of their head, which is fine. But that may mean that your discernment about where your experience was happening may just be where you placed your attention. So that's where guiding people at the beginning and just reminding them like, hey, see what that feels like, but also remember you have these other body parts too, and like see if you can just feel like what's going on in your hands, and I think where we place our attention is where we do a lot of self-healing. So as long as your attention is placed somewhere, you're giving yourself your own healing there. So you're encouraging a deeper level of receptivity to the vibrations that are moving through the body. So you in a sense relax into it and you open up instead of being in kind of a tense space of resistance. And you're still going to get a healing even if you are in a little bit of resistance, but it will be a little bit more limited in terms of how you walk away feeling, which I think is important, because if we can retrain ourselves in just everyday life when we're not with the bowls to be able to release that tension and go into receptivity, we end up doing a lot of healing work just from placing our attention there without needing anything outside of ourselves to get to that point.
I thought you said something a while back that was so fascinating, that when you're hearing a sound that is maybe disturbing to you, or something feels like off, you don't like it, you wish the sound would change to the next sound, that is actually something that needs to come up. And I've definitely experienced that, where I'm just like, oh, I don't like that. And I want to like switch to the next, because I've been listening to like different hertz. I don't even remember what number it was, but like to help me fall asleep. And I'm like, oh, I don't like that feeling. And I just, hit next. And so I love that you said, like, we don't really need to label it, like why we don't like it, but just recognizing that we don't like it and kind of allowing whatever to, just to kind of come up and out of you and like settle into it.
Yeah. Yeah. And sometimes it's just an exploration, it's like, ooh, I don't like this. Okay, where in my body am I feeling it?
Yeah.
And then just putting your attention there and just sitting with the discomfort, it creates this level of healing because you're retraining your nervous system that you can actually manage discomfort instead of running away from it or being in avoidance to it. So there's a difference between being like, oh, I want to be in discomfort all the time. Well, that's not a great balance, but if we're in avoidance to discomfort,
yeah.
then,
next.
then in a sense, it's running in the background all of the time. And we're just kind of Band-Aid fixing our vibrational state.
And if we always cut ourselves off 100% from that, like, not so great feeling, that uncomfortable feeling, how can we feel the deepest places of pleasure? Because that spectrum is like we need the opposite to really to really feel deep pain. We can really feel deep joy, right? Yes. So it's like, if you don't have that ever, and we're just in this like, numbed out state, we're really not fully living our full life, like our expression of who we are as individual people.
Absolutely. And I think that's what most people are experiencing, is a lot more of that numb state that you're describing.
Oh, yeah. With prescription medications, drinking, social media, so many things that we can just be distracted and numb out with.
Well, and we just don't have tools that are brought to our attention of how we can navigate discomfort. So we have a frame of reference of something different, and so a lot of people are just in a survival state and they don't know how to get out of that loop.
Yeah.
And I think that's where introducing people to sound therapy can be really profound, because it doesn't force something into you, but it guides you to yourself. And what you find is, oh, I've been avoiding feeling into this place. And then it's like, oh, is it because I have all this pain here? How did I not know I had all this pain here? Like, before this, I wasn't in tune with that pain. And so sometimes after a sound bath, someone will come up to me and say, I had an incredible amount of pain and then it went away. Wow. And now I feel kind of like high and just sort of like, woo, and I love hearing stories like that, because you worked through something. Yeah. You went through the tunnel instead of trying to go around it or underneath it. And so every sound experience is different, because if you work through that, then your body's like, okay, we moved that. Now we're on to the next thing. So not every experience is the same. And there are experiences we have as a group that are very uncomfortable. Like, there's way more levels of discomfort than there is like, ooh, this is lovely. But we learn to not judge that and to say, okay, this is what we collectively agreed on. And I think that that's a really beautiful thing, to come together and be so vulnerable. Like, where do we get to experience that level of deep, intimate healing with like a bunch of strangers in the room? So I love that I get to witness and facilitate this experience, because I think we've been sort of pulled away from community, and we've been pulled away from each other. And it's like, oh, we have all these differences and we have these different beliefs, so we can't come together anymore. And I love that this is an opportunity where none of that matters. And we're all just there to take care of ourselves and to radiate that out. And we play off of that in a room. It's
help
really
heal
beautiful.
each other.
Yeah. So the frequency things are interesting to talk to for people, because I think it gives them an image of what's happening. And I think that allows them to drop in a little bit deper, because the sound is weird. I mean, if you've never experienced sound bowls before, you're like, what is happening? Sometimes animals are like, is there like, like a helicopter landing? Like, things are shaking, so it's funny. We all have that learning curve of how to receive it and drop in. And I think when you give people a little bit of a download on how the body is constantly a little sponge or an antenna, and we're just taking in frequencies all day long. We've got frequencies from the mics. We've got frequencies from our power lines. We've got all kinds of
Lights.
things.
Sometimes you hear the light have a little buzz.
Buzzing. Humming.
Yeah, our body is inundated with that. So if we were living in a world where that wasn't the case, maybe we wouldn't have a need for so much sound therapy to regulate our systems back, right? So it's kind of like we're getting back to our baseline, and the bowls remind the body, oh yes, this is the frequency I'm capable of carrying. So the frequencies are created with intention to get the body to, for the best of its ability, to find an average that it can carry that frequency as you leave. So your body's going to calibrate to whatever it's capable of holding in that moment. And then next time you show up for another sound bath, you kind of build on that. So everyone has their own threshold, everyone has their own need, but we all walk away with getting something out of it that was really important in terms of getting back to our true nature.
You just made me say something that literally blew my fucking mind. And I was like, okay, everything you were saying was so good, so I didn't want to cut you off. But I'm like, whoa, we used to just, our ancestors, live in nature, be surrounded by the natural sounds in our environment, the birds, the bugs, the sunlight, the water, the trees. And now we're living in city environments. All of the sounds around us most of them are not natural unless we are getting out in nature. And it's like these sound bowls can kind of purify us and get us back to what we're supposed to be experiencing. We were never meant to experience all these unnatural vibrations.
Yeah.
Like a cleanse.
Yeah.
It is a cleanse. Yeah, absolutely. Well, and your cells are regenerating themselves all the time. And so what you're doing is you're giving a vibrational current to those cells that kind of amplifies its ability to regenerate. So people that are in recovery from illness, like I see a lot of cancer patients. I see a lot of people that have just had major surgeries that are trying to recover, and they have really wild experiences, like the physical sensations in their body and the things that come up for them may be really potent compared to somebody who maybe is not in that kind of state and they're relatively healthy. And it doesn't mean that both aren't benefiting, but it's fascinating for me to show up and witness people in the same exact sound bath having totally different experiences because their body has been more affected by maybe a lower frequency, such as radiation and things like that, right? And so the body goes, okay, this is my opportunity. Like I know exactly what to do with this invitation, because it's like a wave passing through your body. So you're just absorbing and taking it in and then distributing it to wherever it needs to go, So I love having that awareness of how simple it is and yet how profound it is. Like, I think the combination of those two things is really important for people to experience, because we tend to complicate things when it comes to healing, especially. It's like, okay, I have to do this specific mantra, and then I must sit in this position, and I have to hold my breath, and I need to, and it's just like so mental.
And none of it's intuitive.
Right.
When you're doing that.
Yeah.
There's, again, back to the science. I've seen some really cool images under a microscope of water and how it changes with the different sound vibrations. And like they were playing really heavy metal and what that did. And then they were playing, a different frequency, the frequency of love. And it made like these beautiful snowflake crystal designs. And so it's all backed up.
Yeah.
Dr. Emoto has a whole book, a book and studies around all of that. Like, I forget what the name of that book is. You know what I'm talking about? It's a tiny little book, but yeah. So it's funny that you were just bringing that up, because as we were sitting here, one of the questions in my mind is, I was like, I wonder if you drink like a good amount of water, like not before you're there, like, so you have to pee, when you're interrupted. But I'm saying, like, if you're feeling really hydrated that day, I wonder what that experience would be like versus somebody coming in who is the opposite, dehydrated, just because the way the cells would also receive the frequencies by being so nourished by the water.
Totally.
Be really interesting.
Yeah. Yeah. I know for my personal experience, I've done some, like saltwater baths, you know, like the Epsom salt, you can go in a float tank, right? So I'll do like a float tank and listen to my sound therapy at the same time. And I have really profound experiences when I pair the two together.
That's
so I
cool.
feel like, either
Like
being,
what? I want to
Share the experience.
well, you know,
Nothing's too weird on this podcast.
it feels like there's sort of an unconscious thing that we do where we block ourselves from certain information. And when you're in a certain state, your ability to receive that and know what to do with it and not have it derail you is really interesting. So for me, because I'm constantly showing up to like tune into my body and be like, what's going on for me? I have this sort of silly and general idea that like, oh, I've already tackled these things. Like I've already looked at all that, like done, next, you know. And when you're in a situation where your body goes, oh, I feel really safe here, it's like you crack open the box and there's all this stuff underneath it.
Wow.
And so for me, that's what happens is I'll put myself in an experience where there's like an amplified current from the water. Like to your point, I think digestively is also a piece of that. But getting into that float tank, you know, I'm seeing a lot more vivid colors, and then all of a sudden it's like, oh, here's all of this information about why all of these things matter, and you know, and you think that this is where you're going, but this is actually where you're going. And so you kind of have these profound, like, oh, if I was sitting in my room right now, consciously aware of this download, I'd be judging the heck out of it. I would be getting in my own way. I would be critiquing it like, well, that's not what I wanted. And that's not what I asked for. And that doesn't make any sense. How am I going to make that happen? You know, we go into the mental space, but because you're in such a deep relaxation, your ability to run that through your own neutrality and just be almost like observing the information.
Yeah, I was going to say, it seems like it's from a different perspective.
It is. And it's still you, but it's like a different version of you that's not in the judgment or the critique or the analysis or, you know, trying to get in your own way. And so the self-sabotage kind of turns off. And so, yeah, many times I've had those experiences where you walk away and you're just really changed because you've assimilated the information in such a way that it's like now your mind has to catch up to that information rather than being the finder of that information.
It's deep therapy.
Yeah.
Totally.
Yeah. So I love combining sound with other things, like other modalities. I mean, even just at my house, I'm doing the dishes, like playing a recording on my phone of a bowl experience I had a few weeks ago, you know. So I'm constantly giving my body an opportunity to recalibrate to those vibrational states. And what's interesting about music, because I love music, I love all types of music. There really isn't like a genre of music I don't listen to. I love music. But what I found is that having too much of like mainstream music was making me feel really anxious. And that's where I started to look into the frequency that the music is being put out in. And so there's a time period in which they switched from recording music in 432 hertz to 440. And just that little switch was enough to cause a little bit more of an anxiety experience.
A little bit more of a separation.
Yeah.
Well, if everybody's in a chaotic state, then they go into a form of hypnosis, and then
Control.
Exactly. Suggestions and information that can come in a different way. I know. It's crazy.
That is so crazy.
Yeah. So the agitation is very real.
Yeah.
I mean, you feel into that and you're like, why am I agitated? Or why am I a little anxious? You know, so
I've been having no music on when I'm going on my walks in the morning. Lately, I just need nothing. But I am really, like, you've inspired me. I'm going to really start digging into the sound bowls and just listening to it. Maybe eventually I'll start playing around with playing them too. But I love this so much.
Yeah, I think some ancient information is really important to revisit. And like one of them is looking at certain frequencies that they would use for actual healing experiences. We see this in like the Egyptian eras. There's a lot of Egyptian information, but we see certain like hieroglyphs and things that were created during that time that appears that they were having sound experiences. So they weren't necessarily doing the crystal bowls the way that we have them created now because it's machinery,
Right.
but they were using different frequency tools and then coming together as a collective and using sound to heal. And so I spent a good time researching all of the information I could find there just to like meet myself halfway between my intuitive knowing and like, where's the tangible evidence, And I think one of the main things that stood out to me was noticing that the solfeggio frequencies, which is a spectrum of frequency that they would use for a lot of like classical music and things, really reset the brain chemistry. And so you notice that there are just certain frequencies that feel a little bit more agitating. And a lot of that is like digitally created music. Sometimes that plays a role in how the body receives it. But also just when people ask me, what's a good place to start? I always recommend solfeggio because I think for a lot of people, there's a lot of self-exploration there. And so if you just type in like solfeggio frequencies, you'll find oftentimes people create a nice little playlist of, okay, we go through all of them and you can kind of notice like which one feels really yummy and which one feels a little like weird, or maybe it brings up an old thought. Like you may have like a memory of some kind like come into your center of your head and you're like, wow, I'm thinking about that random moment when I was like 7 years old, and so it brings things out of the body. And it's not just about the crystal bowls themselves. It's about looking at variables in terms of how we experience frequency on a day-to-day level and keeping it exciting, because it can't be monotonous. It can't be boring and expect ourselves to still want to use that modality. I think in order to kind of keep it fresh and fun, we need to be in rotation. And I think that's better for the body anyways. Just like with food, eating the same thing every day is not exactly a great choice for our system. We need the variety. We need the seasonal foods. We need to be switching things up. And those all have their own unique frequency.
Yeah. And in nature, we're getting different frequencies, the birds, and like I was mentioning before. And I actually heard something really cool that the frequency of the birds chirping in the morning, you probably know something about this, actually allows the plants to open up and then the bugs to come. And it's all this beautiful unfolding
harmony
in the morning.
All in harmony.
And we're a part of that.
Yes.
And we forget that we're not connected. We think we're disconnected from that.
Yeah.
But we are a part of nature. And we are a part of that unfolding.
Yes. Yeah. And just the fact that everything is emitting sound. I mean, even the plants emit sound and we just can't tune into that frequency to hear it. But it's really interesting when we look at the studies. And
yeah, I've heard some of those too, where they attach the little like wires to the sound, the plants. And then it makes this beautiful sound. It sounds like a symphony sometimes.
Yeah. Yeah. And so part of it is like, intuitively connecting back with nature, right? So there was a point where, like I mentioned the CBD thing earlier, I played bowls for my plants because we started growing the CBD because at that time you couldn't really purchase it and it was a whole journey. And we noticed that the plants did really well that year.
Wow.
It was like, okay, we thought we were doing good and now we've like tripled the amount that they're producing. And so I would play like native flute music and drumming, and then I'd play crystal bowls. And so
I'm going to have to try this in my garden.
Yeah. And so it's fun to just get into that playfulness of it. It's like, oh, I don't know what's going to happen, but it can't hurt. Let's just see, Yeah. And you typically get validated on some level, or the animals will just all flock to you and you feel like you're like Snow White in a Disney movie,
Oh, I love that. I used to pretend like I was all the time when I was little.
Yeah. And those are real experiences that we have routinely when we get the opportunity to play outside. The animals are just, they can feel, first they're a little tripped out, like from what they're hearing in their ears, but then they kind of drop in and realize like, oh, this is like a healing experience.
Wow.
This feels good. And so then the animals like all kind of flock to us. We've had deer come up before.
So cool.
Yeah.
We have a drumming experience in town. There's like drum circles, and that too, just like being part of that bass, that deep sound, everyone's got their own, but playing together. And, we were talking about earlier about just this collective experience and this collective energy that's happening. So to sit and match somebody's beat and just kind of being on that frequency with them is such an amazing experience. We actually had a winery that did it once. So we had like a fire pit going and it was dark and everybody's just playing their instrument. And Yes, like talk about those cool experiences that happen and what starts to show up in that space is just so
That
healing.
connection
Yeah,
is what
it
you made me
is.
think of. Like all of a
Yeah.
sudden, like we can't see how we're all connected physically, but we are. And I almost think when you were saying that, it's like, oh, that would be like an example of how much we really are truly connected.
Yeah, it felt very tribal and
Yeah.
very like
Yeah.
back to those. I mean, we literally had a fire, going in the middle of us, but I was dropping into this whole idea of just like, Native American culture and people sitting around and just, again, that deeper, a little more masculine feeling, but just this grounding in the earth by the beat of the drums. Like it was so freaking cool.
Love that. Yeah, it's reminding me of this sort of lesson that I've followed for a long time. It's that there's a disharmony in stagnancy. So when your body is stagnant, that's where you start to have everything go out of alignment. When there's movement, there's healing happening. So you may not feel 100% better, but as long as there's movement going through it, then you're not really in a state of imbalance. You're in transition. And so as long as there's movement, you're creating that change that you're seeking. And so the drums are a great modality for that because it just creates movement through sound where it breaks up all that stagnant frequency. So when people feel really stuck in their life or they feel like they've tried a bunch of things and they're having a hard time, getting out of that pattern, oftentimes it's just, okay, where can I create movement? And there's all these different choices. Drumming is one of them. Also just getting out and going for walks and creating physical body movement. There's also intuitive training where we look at, oftentimes I'm working with people and we're using like our hands and we're creating some friction in the hands and then we're pulsing the energy back and forth. And now the body is moving things that it normally would be out of alignment and just be frozen and stuck. And so we look at breaking it down into simple ways of thinking about what healing looks like or how the body experiences it. And it really is this simple thing about, okay, is there a stagnancy? How do I break that up? How can I invite movement? Maybe I like dance. Maybe I just need to have massage. That's creating movement through the blood. So, I love that reminder because we're really looking at different ways that even the crystal bowls are creating movement through the body, right? So all the different layers of things that we're bringing in is movement. And that's how we keep our vibrational state coming into a much higher level over and over and over again.
Wow.
So
I know. I'm like, that's like a mic drop. Just like, okay, got the message.
Yeah.
That's cool. Wrapped it all up.
Yeah.
But I love having that because it's a good reminder for me, like I'm always visiting that. Like if I feel stuck, I'm like, okay, what do I need to move? Maybe I need to move all the furniture in my house.
Yeah.
Maybe I need to, and you're always kind of checking in with that. Like, what is it that I can create movement with just to stimulate
Good reminder.
the energy?
That's funny. That's so profound and resonates deeply with me. This is kind of funny, but we just got a brand new couch. And one of the reasons I love it is because you can reconfigure it 1,000 ways.
yeah.
Yeah, I love those.
And I am one of those people that like have to constantly change my space up. And I never really dig deep into that. I just do it because I know it makes me feel good. So I'm usually not in my head about it. I'm just like, oh, I got a feeling this is what I'm doing,
Yeah.
And but it's so interesting because again, like all these things, all these ways we're pulled in different directions. If we really do dive deep in it, we can learn so much more about who we are and why. And I know years ago we used to always say like, oh, if a woman colors her hair, cuts it, like she's usually going through some big transition, in her life. And so I think it's the same thing. It's this. And we're in constant change. Like life is about change, right? Everything is ebb and flow. Everything's yin yang. We're always in this balance, trying to get into this balanced state, but it is constantly moving. Nothing can just remain like completely unchanged.
Yeah.
Ever.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Usually the stagnancy is because there's some part of us that's resisting the change or in conflict to the change.
Yeah.
And we can't always identify exactly what that is. And it could just be something that's sort of stuck like in the memory center of the body. You know, like maybe there was a change that you experienced that really was uncomfortable and your body's like, we're not going back there. And I don't care that you think this is a positive change. It's still vibrating on change. Therefore, I am not happy about receiving this. So you got to guide your body into like leveling up to this particular timeline and not being stuck in that past experience. So sometimes if you can't create movement in the area you're really looking for, if you can just do something silly like move your couch around, it's enough movement for the body to kind of drop into receiving it a little bit better. So it's like we're so narrowly focused on, well, I only want to change, you know, my career. And we think about it just so like dialed into that specific thing that we don't step back and say, okay, well, maybe that's too much pressure to really focus on that. Let me look at something that has less pressure around it. And maybe that's, I can change what I'm eating. I can totally change what I'm putting in my body. Maybe that's enough to kind of give my body that reminder, like, hey, change is a beautiful thing. Change
like
is a
you
positive
did.
thing.
It's what you did, right? Like even within the first, you know, few minutes we were talking about having a diagnosis and these small shifts that you made just out of curiosity, but how that movement, that change gave you like this huge result, you know?
Yeah.
So, Libbee, can you tell us like, is this part of the work that you also do with people? Like I know that you host, you know, these group therapy sound bowl experiences for people. I know you also go into people's homes and do, you know, individual or couple type work, but can you just tell us like if people want to know more about you and they wanted to experience some of your services, what are they looking for?
Yeah.
What do they do?
Yeah, it's amazing. So vibrations are not limited by like your physical connection with someone. So part of my training was learning how can I do what I do, and I learned that I could do it by imagining being with someone that I wasn't physically present with. So much of my offerings now are actually by phone, which is really interesting. I didn't imagine my life would go that direction, but here we are. And I think it's a convenience factor for everyone. They can be, you know, taking a break out of their workday. They can squeeze in a session with me somewhere, you know, without having to get in the car and drive and meet me somewhere. And it's not that we don't value that in-person thing, but what I'm finding is that people's lives are so busy that often it's prohibitive from them saying yes to doing a little.
And it's better to at least have that experience with you over the phone than not at all.
It is. And sometimes in the comfort of their own home is actually a better thing for them. It just depends on where your nervous system is at. So I trained myself to be able to use my own body to be able to kind of match the frequency that's going on for that person. And then because of my own information, I refer to it as like my library. And so I look at that information from a perspective of what is true for me. So I can feel like, for example, if I have a certain frequency of familiarity of a liver, then if somebody's liver is out of alignment, I'm going to pick up on that because I have a frame of reference of what the liver feels like. So I taught myself how to use my own information in my own body to be able to discern what's going on for other people.
That's incredible.
That is what I do on most days. I have probably about 1,000 sessions a year. I was like calculating it in my head on my way here. I was like, how many sessions do I do? And so that is predominantly what I do. And then I have also in-person sound bath experiences. And so coming together in groups and facilitating those. And sometimes those things overlap and clients overlap with that. And sometimes they don't. Sometimes they're wildly different. And sometimes I have sessions with people, they don't even know I do sound therapy. So I feel like I walk a few different paths and they do meet somewhere in the middle. But, a lot of people are looking for some insight outside of themselves to validate what they know to be true. Or sometimes it's, oh, I really wasn't even thinking of that. That's an aha moment for me. Now I know how to take this information and guide myself going forward. So I'm always trying to remind people that this is about also building your own connection back with your body so you can have your own discernment and not be like reliant upon somebody outside of yourself to give you that information. But I love working with people in that capacity because oftentimes people that identify as like intuitives or mediums, they kind of have this strange codependent relationship. And I work really hard to not have that.
Yeah, you're actually giving people their power back or reminding them that they had it in the first place.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's like, okay, so now, this is what I'm seeing. This is what I'm tuning into. Maybe there's something out of alignment in your solar plexus in the center of your body. And then I can kind of look at pieces of information, like data will just kind of show up. So maybe it's something that happened in the past. Maybe it's something they're currently going through. Sometimes it's a combination of things. And so it's a collaboration. And we just kind of navigate it together. I'm like, oh, is this coming up for you? They're like, yes, I can't believe that you mentioned that, and so it's a really interesting space for me to be in, because I have a hard time identifying how to explain what I do. So oftentimes I just say, like, I'm an intuitive, that sort of specializes in the medical side, just because that's been my life path and just because that's so familiar to me. And I also just happen to know a lot about herbs and medicine and things like that. And so because that's my frame of reference, that information comes up very easily for me. So it has to do with passions of like research and life experience. And I think that's where your intuitive ability really comes from. Occasionally I'll get something where I'm like, I don't know anything about this particular herb, but I keep hearing it. And so there's something there for you. Like, go explore that on your own, so I'm not trying to be, this is the one thing you must do, and I know all the things. I just trust
that.
it.
I love the way you're breaking it down for our listeners, because you're letting people see that this is something you developed over time.
Yeah.
And I think so often people just think, oh, well, I don't have that gift. That's a gift, and I don't have it.
Totally.
And they really look to and rely on other people or outside sources, when really it can be developed.
Yes.
You worked at this. And I also think what a beautiful thing that, even though it was hard on your family, like unbelievably painful and hard to watch your brother go through everything he did, that was part of your journey that you were supposed to experience so that you could get to this place.
Yes.
And you've used all of your life experiences to bring you to where you are right now.
Yeah, totally. It's sort of a radical embracing and and it's being able to carry both polarities without letting one sort of dominate the other. It's like I can always tune into the past and go, oh gosh, that was such a tough time. And man, it's like sometimes you get angry about the experiences that you've had. It's so frustrating. But then you can also hold this other like, gosh, but it brought us all of this gift. And so I can carry both simultaneously. And I think that when we approach healing, sometimes we make the mistake of, I should be over that. I shouldn't be able to tune into the anger. And it's like, well, that's the full spectrum of emotional experience. Like it doesn't need to go away in order for you to be able to create again and to be in a new space where you feel free from the limitations that's brought you. You can get to a level of healing where you still allow yourself to revisit what that felt like in that moment. And that I think that raw beauty of that feeling is so important for you to be able to say all of the feelings are okay.
Right.
Because if I can feel the heaviness and the density, then I can feel the bliss and the ecstasy. But without having the willingness to drop into the pain, then you're going to have a really hard time allowing your body to feel into the joy. So I've learned that yes, there is so much truth to trauma that we've had and things that are really difficult, but the identity of that and the narrative that is something that you're being victimized by is a really damaging experience. So there's a difference between saying, yeah, I went through that and I suffered and it was really hard, to then saying, well, this is forevermore what I have to operate from. And there's no freedom in that. There's stagnancy, there's no movement, there's no flow. And so it's important to build on that and say, well, this is true. And now I'm not in that state anymore. I'm not in that experience. Now I'm over here. What do I want to create? Right. It's like remembering you're a creator and that you get to choose how you utilize that information.
These are such wise healing words for, I think, so many that are, no matter what you're experiencing, to hear what you just said is so empowering that you can, even if you're in it right now, you can maybe then see that it's something that you're going to go through and try to take whatever good you can from a horrible experience and grow and push through. And then it all can exist.
Yes. Yes.
It's such wise words. And thank you so much for sharing this. The whole,
Thank you.
everything that we've talked about on this podcast, it really is mind blowing to me, because I think, like a lot of our listeners, probably myself, I just thought, oh, sound bowls, like, yeah, they make me feel really relaxed and I like them. I had no idea what you could do with sound bowls, and just the healing that can take place. And I really am like perplexed by it all. You are just fantastic. Thank you. This has been a wonderful, very enlightening experience.
Oh, thank you so much. Thank you for having me and letting me get nerdy with you guys.
Anytime.
It's so much
Thank
fun.
you so much, Libbee.
Thank you.